Monday, then the ceasefire could probably end.
And we do want to begin this hour with conflicting messages and confusion swirling around the states of the U.S.-Iran ceasefire. President Donald Trump now says that he may not extend that ceasefire after it expires on Wednesday if there's no peace deal. Iranian officials telling CNN that they expect the next round of talks to happen in Pakistan on Monday. President Trump claiming that Iran has, quote, agreed to everything, but Tehran is pushing back on that. A senior Iranian official saying that Trump's claims that Iran will make concessions, including forfeiting its uranium stockpile, that those claims are false.
Well, he's got to say something different because, they have people that they have to cater to also. I really don't. I'm just doing the thing that's right. I'm just saying it like it is. And we have a situation, I think, that is going to be very beneficial. And the main thing is that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. You cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon, and that supersedes everything else.
Our team of reporters covering the story from all angles. Leila Garagoslu standing by in London. But first, let's go to CNN's Eleni Jokos joining me from Dubai. Eleni, to you, we saw oil prices perhaps take a drop there after the Iranians announced that the Strait of Hormuz was open again. Give us a sense of what's actually happening, though, in that strait. Are we seeing ships move again?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And just on this grand announcement, this declaration that the Strait of Hormuz is open, we saw markets responding aggressively, a huge drop in oil prices. At one point, they were down around 14%. That's starting to reverse because, reality is very different to words and rhetoric that comes through not only from the Iranian side, but also from the side of the Trump administration. I want to show you an image now that is depicting what's happening live in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we're seeing some movement, which is really interesting. And the red little dots are basically indicative of tankers that are carrying fuel or crude or any other related products. And they have been able to transit through the strait. Now, they've gone through the Iranian checkpoint. The question is, what's going to happen when they hit the U.S. naval blockades? We're still trying to ascertain, are these vessels in any way linked to Iran? Because if they are, they would then be stopped by the U.S. Navy. But I also want to show you another image where this was taken in the early hours of this morning, showing traffic through the strait. You had a dozen vessels heading towards the strait. They then stop. Some of them turn around. Now, the question is, did they get a warning message from the Iranians? And what made them stop? What deterred them from making the transit as a whole? Now, let's talk about the conflicting messages, because frankly, there's been so much contradiction. You had on one end the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, yesterday saying it is open, but there's an Iranian designated route that vessels need to take. Then you had the parliamentary speaker, Araghchi, Ghalibaf, coming out with something completely different, saying that if the U.S. naval blockade is still going to be in place, then the strait is not going to remain open. And then also saying there's a designated route and, importantly, Iranian authorization. That is still the same as we saw previously. So vessels that want to transit need to engage directly with Iranian authorities. Now, that could cause compliance issues, reputational issues for some of these shippers, and that's why we're not seeing a massive movement through the strait. That all being said, a lot hinges on what happens in the next round of talks. But certainly from a market's perspective, they took it as good news. The International Energy Agency keeps talking about just how long it's going to take to unwind this huge energy crisis that has hit not only the world, but frankly, markets here in the Middle East. They say it's going to take 2 years to fully unwind. You've got Brent crude that's up slightly today, up 1.7%, and WTI also up just below 2%, and really just showing that all these contradictory messages are having an effect on how markets are responding, how people are looking at this, and importantly, shippers need clarity. They want to know the threat has been eliminated and they have free passage and free movement, and that is not clear at this point, Polo.
They have waited for weeks, waiting to find out what would happen next. And now, very much a he said, they said situation. So, Eleni, thank you so much for helping us try to make some better sense of what's happening there right now.
You don't deserve to settle, so play a game that won't either. We've introduced major changes to agents, weapons, and maps, and this is just the beginning. For the past 5 years, we made a promise to defy the limits, and we plan to keep it by bringing you new content, adjusting what's not working, or even reinventing things altogether. Most importantly, this is a competitive tactical shooter where abilities are there to help your gunplay shine, not to hog the spotlight. So we've made some changes to cut down on overall utility impact. Because when the odds are stacked against you, it should be your crispy aim and positioning that gives you a stronger fighting chance or the edge. And for maps, that's your playground, which means
So it's very unclear how things are going to go. I think it's going to really depend on who comes to the table. Now, we don't know who's going to really be leading those. We're assuming that it's going to be the same teams that we saw the other week in Islamabad. For the Iranian side, that's going to be Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister, and Ali Bagheri Kani, who is also a nuclear negotiator. He was a key player in the JCPOA deal. We also know that the Iranians in the last round of talks brought in technical experts who are going to be key to get any sort of nuclear issue over the line. Now, there has been some back and forth. President Trump recently talked about Iran's uranium. Let's take a listen.
This process, we're getting along well, but who knows with anyone, but who knows with Iran in particular. This process should go very quickly, and that most of the points are already negotiated and agreed to.
Now, the Iranians have said that they have not agreed to any sort of concession, and they have said that they're not going to be an exemption under international law. They're not going to be put aside and have to not follow anything other than international law. So we're not sure where this is going to go. Now, I will say for the Iranians, it is quite a issue of sovereignty when it comes to the nuclear program. It is tied to their national identity. It is why it's a red line, and we're unlikely to see them shift on this. So it remains to be seen how they're going to close these gaps. Obviously, the ceasefire deadline is coming up, and President Trump says he's not going to extend it.
This morning, here's what you need to know today. The ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran is holding for now, but President Trump is raising questions about how much longer it will last.
Maybe I won't extend it, but the blockade is going to remain. But maybe I won't extend it.
The conflicting messages coming from both sides about the Strait of Hormuz ahead of another round of talks on Monday.
You've got houses down. This is massive. We got vehicles. Here.
Those ripped through the central U.S. Friday, damaging dozens of homes. That system is now pushing east this morning. Allison Chinchar is tracking that for us. Plus, Pope versus President, the public feud between the two and whether it could come at a public cost for President Trump. And excitement is not the only thing on the rise as the World Cup nears. Public transportation prices also up, while it'll cost as much as $150 just to get to the matches. It is Saturday, April 18th. I'm Victor Blackwell. It is always a pleasure to be with you. We start with the breaking news this morning on the war with Iran. This morning, Iran's military announced it would reimpose restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz. They alleged repeated breaches of trust by the U.S. regarding the ceasefire. Now, both countries claim the strait was open on Friday, but Iranian state media warned that agreement would be null and void if the U.S. naval blockade continues. Meanwhile, U.S. and Iranian delegations are set to hold another round of negotiations in Pakistan on Monday to end the war. President Trump said last night, though, that he may not extend the ceasefire if a deal is not reached.
Maybe I won't extend it, but the blockade is going to remain. But maybe I won't extend it. So you have a blockade, and unfortunately, we'll have to start dropping bombs again. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. I think it's going to happen.
CNN's Elena Jokos is joining us now from Dubai. So what are you learning first about these talks?
Yeah, I mean, what we understand right now, these talks are very consequential. And as you heard from President Trump, the blockade and lifting of the restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz is going to be a really important part of whatever is discussed between the United States and Iran. And it's been a sticking point, right? Because it's inflicting pain on the global economy. And of course, in the United States, gas prices are rising, jet fuel prices are rising, and you're seeing massive issues in terms of shortfalls because this critical choke point is blocked off. Now, the Iranian military has put out really important statements. Spokesperson. So in other words, this means that vessels are going to have to get authorization from Iranian military to transit the straits, that potentially a toll could still be in place, and then importantly, using the Iranian designated route. So things have escalated quite dramatically over the past 24 hours, frankly. When we heard from the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi yesterday declaring sort of, the Strait of Hormuz finally open, but also with a caveat that the Iranian designated route needs to be used, it was reading between the lines. Is the Strait of Hormuz really open? Then you had the parliamentary speaker, Ghalibaf, coming out and saying that you still need authorization from the Iranians and you still need to use the Iranian designated route. So for shippers out there that I've been speaking to, they say it's mixed messaging and it's very confusing. And it's really indicative of what we've been seeing in the Strait in terms of movement. If you look at marine traffic right now, around 12 vessels attempted to cross through the Strait. They then stop and they turn around. Did they receive warning messages from the Iranians? Possibly. But then you also saw around 4 tankers that have been able to transit without any challenge whatsoever. We're looking at why, and it seems that these 4 tankers are part of the Iran shadow fleet, and 2 of them have been sanctioned by the United States. So technically, they would be hitting the U.S. naval blockade in the Gulf of Oman at some point. Now, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps also saying that the restrictions will remain in place in the Strait of Hormuz unless the United States removes its naval blockade and allows free movement of all Iranian-linked vessels and vessels that are emanating from Iran's ports. So this is really significant. But when I've spoken to experts, they say the Strait was possibly never really open despite this grand declaration that we saw yesterday, because it is contradictory. You're seeing mixed messages. And of course, from the United States front, this is going to be one of the sticking points that we're going to be seeing discussed and negotiated, Victor.
All right, Delaney Jokos, thank you. This morning, Iran's military says it is now reimposing restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz. They're alleging repeated breaches of trust by the U.S. regarding the current ceasefire, and both nations claim the strait was open on Friday. Iranian media stated that there would be null and void if the U.S. naval blockade continues. Now, all of this is happening as the U.S. and Iran prepare to meet in Pakistan early next week for another round of negotiations to try to end the war. But President Trump is already putting a clock on the talks. He said last night that if the deal is not reached, he may not extend the ceasefire at all.
Maybe I won't extend it, okay, but the blockade is going to remain. But maybe I won't extend it. So you have a blockade. And unfortunately, we'll have to start dropping bombs again. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. I think it's going to happen.
We're covering all angles with CNN's Nick Robertson in Islamabad and CNN's Oren Lieberman in Jerusalem. Nick, you're first. What do we know about the talks?
The big picture is this. President Trump has sounded positive, although slightly less positive, a bit more cautious just there as we heard him. The Iranian foreign minister has said that they are inches away from getting a deal. The Pakistan foreign minister, and of course Pakistan being the interlocutor here, said 80% of the deal has been done. But it really hit a rocky moment yesterday after the Iranians announced, and their foreign minister announced, the opening of the Strait of Hormuz under strict control of the IRGC, the hardline military. That hadn't really been tough enough in explaining the opening. And then you had President Trump's response saying that the U.S. blockade on the Strait of Hormuz was going to remain in place. And that produced a big negative reaction inside of Iran. And you had hardline voices saying that, well, if that blockade, the U.S. blockade remains, then we're going to close it again and reimpose ours. And that is what has happened in the past couple of hours here. You also have pushback in detail to what President Trump was saying yesterday. President Trump was saying on Truth Social that the Iranians had had agreed never to have nuclear enrichment, never to and to allow the United States to come and get what he called the nuclear dust. Now, Iran's top negotiator, the Speaker of Parliament, pushed back and said President Trump is lying on 7 different accounts, including those 2 I just mentioned. And he said lies will not lead to a deal. And in the last hour or so, some of the, again, hardline voices in Iran are suggesting the Iranians won't come to talks next week in Islamabad. I think the underlying expectation is that they will. And what we're seeing in part in Iran at the moment is what we've seen historically, the hardliners and the more moderates in a clash. But of course, and the moderates being the ones that are coming to do the negotiation, both the foreign minister and the Speaker of Parliament, criticized for the concessions they apparently made last weekend. It's a difficult moment, obviously, in Iran because it has been decimated at a leadership level. So who really is in control? This is something people talked about potentially being an issue. And I think we're seeing that unfold here. But the path to diplomacy is there. The expectations on both sides that is still pretty close is there. There's a deadline there. And this is what diplomats who do negotiations will tell you. If both sides believe it can be done and you have a deadline, that's the method to getting it done. Clear it will actually happen, but we seem to be on the pathway to it.
All right, on the pathway. Nick Robertson for us there. Thank you so much. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, displaced civilians. News in the war with Iran, we've learned that Iranian gunboats have fired on a tanker traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. That's according to a UK maritime traffic organization. Let's go now to CNN's Nick Robertson with the latest on the breaking developments. Nick, what do you know?
Yeah, this happened just in the last few minutes and comes within hours of Iran saying that it was going to shut down essentially the Strait of Hormuz again. Now, the tanker captain reported citing 2 IRGC Iranian gunboats. They approached his tanker, did not communicate via the VHF radio, and then started shooting, opening gunfire. 2 IRGC gunboats opening gunfire on this tanker. The tanker and crew, the vessel itself, are reported okay. No casualties there, as best we know at this time. But it does seem to indicate that Iran is doubling down. This is not just rhetoric that they're putting in place in terms of their response to, or how they view the U.S. response to the Iranian opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Yesterday, they were very critical, what officials were in Iran, when President Trump on Truth Social said that he was not going to lift the U.S. blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. Indeed, he was going to keep it in position, it seemed, just to sort of make sure that Iran didn't abrogate or didn't try to get out of agreements that seemed to exist. And as a pressure point, it seemed, to get into talks that were expected early next week. It has to be said that the hardliners in Iran are expressing doubt and concern that those talks expected here early next week may happen. This is more than just rhetoric coming from Iran. It does tend to show here military intent. Is this just going to be an isolated incident? Of course, overnight, after the Iranians had announced that they were going to lift their blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, we saw oil prices come down. We saw the stock markets rebound. Of course, we're in the weekend right now, so don't think anyone expecting changes on that front. But actually, physically on the ground, all those sort of tankers and merchant vessels that were seen heading towards the Strait of Hormuz, and remarkably, a cruise liner was able to get out of the